The forgotten psychology of the 90s generation, why they feel different from everyone else. They say every generation adapts to its time, but psychology says some generations are shaped by what they lost. If you grew up in the 1990s, your mind carries patterns. Modern psychology still struggles to explain. This isn't nostalgia, it's conditioning. People who grew up in the 1990s weren't raised by algorithms. They were raised by uncertainty. No constant notifications, no digital validation, no instant reassurance. And psychology says that absence changed their brains forever. They learned boredom before dopamine, silence before stimulation, imagination before consumption. Back then, entertainment didn't chase you. You had to chase it, and that rewired something deep. Children of the 90s learned patience without being taught it. Waiting wasn't a punishment. It was normal. You waited for your favorite show, waited for letters, waited for phone calls, waited for answers. That waiting trained emotional regulation, a skill many people today never develop. Psychology calls this delayed reward conditioning. It builds resilience, impulse control, emotional depth. That's why many 90s minds feel older than their age. But there's a darker side. The 90s generation grew up between two worlds, an analog childhood, a digital adulthood. That split created psychological friction. They remember life before constant comparison, but now live inside it. They remember privacy, but exist in an exposed world. That conflict creates quiet exhaustion. They don't hate technology. They just remember life without it. And memory changes perception. 90s kids learned connection without constant access. Friendship required effort. Distance didn't mean abandonment. So when modern relationships feel disposable, their nervous system reacts differently. Psychology calls this attachment mismatch. They were wired for depth, but raised into speed. That's why many of them feel misunderstood. Another psychological imprint, they learned self-entertainment. No endless feeds, no instant dopamine loops. They built worlds in their minds, stories, games, imaginations, and that creates strong internal landscapes, which is why many people from the 90s become overthinkers, creators, writers, observers. Their mind learned to generate stimulation internally. But that also means they struggle with emptiness more deeply, because once you've lived without constant noise, you feel noise more intensely. 90s kids were trusted more, left alone more, expected to figure things out, not because parents didn't care, but because fear hadn't yet taken control of parenting. This created independence early. Psychology shows early independence creates two outcomes: strong self-reliance and difficulty asking for help. That's why many from this generation suffer silently. They don't broadcast pain, they normalize it. Another overlooked trait, they witness life without filters, before curated identities, before performance culture. They saw adults fail openly, argue, recover. Reality wasn't edited. So their brain developed a stronger bullshit detector. They feel discomfort around fake positivity, forced confidence, manufactured happiness. They can sense when something isn't real. That's why many of them prefer solitude over shallow connection. But solitude doesn't mean loneliness. It means safety. The 90s generation also learned loss early. Friends moved away and disappeared. Moments ended and stayed ended. There was no archive, no highlights, no replay. This taught emotional impermanence, which makes them value moments deeply and grieve them quietly. They don't chase trends easily. They don't adapt emotionally fast because their nervous system wasn't trained for constant reinvention. Psychology calls this identity stability. And here's the paradox. They adapt intellectually, but resist emotionally. That's why they seem calm on the outside and heavy on the inside. They were taught to deal with it, not toxic strength, but normalized endurance, which creates people who can survive calm, but forget how to rest. They remember boredom, so they don't fear silence. They remember offline joy, so they don't need constant validation. They remember real connection. So superficial attention feels empty. But this also makes them invisible because the modern world rewards noise, and the 90s mind doesn't scream for attention. It observes. That's why they're often underestimated until pressure hits. Because psychology shows people trained in slower worlds handle chaos better. They don't panic easily. They don't need instant answers. They don't collapse under uncertainty. They've lived there before. This generation isn't broken. It's transitional. They carry old world emotional wiring inside a new world system. And that tension creates depth. So if you grew up in the 1990s and feel like you don't fully belong anyway,